So taking something, getting up to 99.999, a couple repeating 9s% the speed of light, and hitting a sun, for example, could actually be enough to cause their sun to go nova.
Now, that's an interesting idea if you wanted to destroy their entire solar system just to be safe. I mean, why stop there? Let's just take out all the suns around them just to be safe.
Hey, you! Yes, you, listening in this dimension. You're hearing the Multiverse Employee Handbook. Oops! Spoilers for your future self. Let's try again. Join me, your quantum superposed supervisor, as we demystify everything from dark matter to why your Uber delivery is late. The Multiverse Employee Handbook. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Entropy Rising, where we talk about science and futurism. I'm your host, Jacob, and I am here with my wonderful co-host, Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing today?
Jake, I'm doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to hear that. Today we have a viewer-requested episode, actually. We ran a poll on Threads. This is what was voted for. This is our second such episode, so if you're interested in voting in these polls, follow us on Threads. Link in the description. The topic for discussion today is the dark forest theory, which, as you know, is a solution to the Fermi Paradox.
Yep, it is one of the solutions. And to those out there who don't know, the Fermi Paradox is essentially a bunch of different theories as to why we have not yet found alien life. Our galaxy is so vast and there are so many planets out there, we just don't know why we have not seen or heard from any other life so far.
Exactly. And the Fermi Paradox we actually covered in a previous episode. It was episode 5. So for anyone who's more curious about the Fermi Paradox as a whole, feel free to check out that episode, but it is not required that you listen to that before this episode.
Yeah, not at all.
As you said, there's multiple solutions to the Fermi Paradox is what they're typically called, and the dark forest theory is one of those solutions. Now, the dark forest theory is a little bit of a chilling solution, right? It's not a happy solution, but the dark forest theory essentially says, imagine that you're a hunter alone in the woods that is full of other hunters. The idea is you don't want to make a lot of noise, because if you do, you risk drawing other hunters to your location who might shoot you. And conversely, if you see a hunter making a bunch of noise, lighting a big bonfire, the dark forest theory says it's in your best advantage to go ahead and eliminate that hunter, because that means there's one less out there who could potentially shoot you later on down the road.
Yeah. In the dark forest theory, it's pretty much thought that every other civilization that we could see that are creating a measurement that could be read by some of our instruments would be a possible threat. So with that being known, would it be the safest and best option to preserve ourselves to shoot first?
Yes, exactly. And a lot of the dark forest theory comes from this idea of game theory. Are you familiar with game theory?
I'm familiar with game theory.
I think most people are. If it's not by name, most people have at least heard of the prisoner's dilemma. Have you heard of that thought experiment, the prisoner's dilemma?
I have not.
The prisoner's dilemma it's a famous thought experiment. It basically imagines you have two prisoners who are brought into separate interview rooms, and they can stay silent or they can rat out the other person. And it goes through this explanation saying that it's always in their best interest to rat out the other person. And the dark forest theory has a similar kind of dilemma, because let's say you do discover a separate alien civilization. Let's say that I'm alien civilization Jacob and you're alien civilization Lucas. Mm-hmm. Now, Lucas, if you discover my civilization, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that we really don't have any way to communicate in a fast manner. We might be 100 light years away from each other. When you discover me, you have 3 options. Option A is that you can choose to do nothing. You can discover me and go about your merry own life. Option B is that you can choose to send me a message. You can reach out to my civilization in hopes of maybe building up some type of friendship. And then option C is, if you have the technology, you could try to destroy my civilization. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind for the dark forest theory is you have to know when you discover my civilization, I have these exact same 3 options. I could choose to ignore you, communicate with you, or destroy you. Now, the reasoning behind the dark forest theory says that option A and B, ignoring me or reaching out to me, have very little benefit to you. Ignoring me obviously has no benefit to you. Reaching out to me, maybe we can work together on science, but due to the communication delay, it's not like we're really going to be able to share materials. We can try to share ideas, but any idea I send you is 100 years out of date by the time it reaches you. Yeah. So you've probably discovered that on your own. But both those options, option A and B, do carry a lot of risk. Because if you identify yourself in this dark forest and I choose to annihilate you, if I go for option C, that's the most cost for you. And you got the least amount of gain in return for it. And you have to know that if you send a message to me, I also might choose to do option C and destroy you. And you have no way of knowing what my intentions are because we're 100 years away from each other for any type of communication.
Yeah.
The dark force theory and the game theory behind it says mathematically, since option 1 and 2 pose very little benefit to you, but high risk, and option C has a little bit of risk to you, but high benefit, which is that you preserve your own civilization. Mathematically, it argues option C is the option that you should go for.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You would have first strike advantage if you were the first to act. And unfortunately, those who shoot first would prevail.
That's at least the idea behind the dark force theory, right? Is whoever shoots first has the best advantage. Now, do they? I don't know. That's a little bit up for debate, right? Because there is a huge risk, too, with trying to shoot first, which is that if you discover my civilization, and let's say that we're on about the same technological level, you fire off an RKM, a relativistic kill missile at me, I have 100 years to develop before that reaches. So there is a risk that maybe by the time it gets to me, we've expanded out past our solar system. Or let's say we're 1,000 light years away from each other. The time you detect my civilization, it took 1,000 years for that light to reach you. And then you decide to send a relativistic missile back. It takes 1,000 years to reach us. We've had 2,000 years of development. We could be a huge multi-star spanning empire at that point, and you just took a pot shot at us.
Absolutely. And thinking about that, that's actually a huge player in it, is that depending on how far away they are, those actions that you make give them that amount of time to prepare.
Exactly.
Assuming that they would be able to notice that you had done something that was hostile at that point.
But that's tricky because of light delay. If you detect the light from a civilization and then immediately respond with something that travels near the speed of light, which is the idea behind a relativistic kill missile, then there's no way they could possibly know that you fired that off. Because by the time the light reaches them to let them know you launched such a weapon, the weapon's right behind that light wave.
Right. Well, it could be a fraction of the speed of light, moving just a smaller object like the size of an elephant or a school bus. We could shoot at a planet. And that's more likely because trying to achieve close to speed of light is more difficult.
It is more tricky, but it does also have a lot of advantages. The closer you get to the speed of light, the more kinetic energy it carries, and you're going to need a large weapon to annihilate a civilization. So taking something, getting up to 99.999, a couple repeating 9% the speed of light, and hitting a sun, for example, could actually be enough to cause their sun to go nova.
Now, that's an interesting idea if you wanted to destroy their entire solar system just to be safe.
Which you should probably do, because there's always the risk that they have O'Neill cylinders maybe orbiting other planets. They could have colonized their moon, other moons. It's really hard to be sure. So to take out the solar system is the best bet.
Let's just say that they're 100 light years away.
Mm-hmm.
They've had 100 years to advance from the point that we saw them as being a hostile civilization. And then they have another 100 years if we're traveling at that speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
Or just below that speed of light to then advance more. So they have 200 years of advancement by the time that we fired our projectile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, why stop there? Let's just take out all the suns around them just to be safe.
That's fair, because there is always the risk that they could have expanded onto separate solar systems. And there's a huge risk if you don't completely annihilate them, because what if they stick around, right? They're going to hold a grudge on you. You just made a blood enemy.
Yeah, and I mean, then you share the same fate, but they also have the same issue. Right? If we're at similar points technologically, then we would have advanced, assuming we would have advanced the same amount that they would have and spanned multiple star systems.
I agree. Now, that actually, you brought up an interesting point. You said if we were at similar points technologically, and that's a really big if, because what are the actual odds that two civilizations would discover each other when they're the same point technologically? I mean, 1,000 years is a humongous difference technologically.
Oh, yeah. It's massive.
That's a rounding error on the types of timescale civilizations develop over. So what are the odds you're going to stumble across a civilization that's equally as developed as you? I think rather slim.
I would say so, yes.
So you're either discovering a civilization that's significantly more advanced than you, which means you're not going to want to attack them, or you're discovering a civilization that's significantly less advanced than you. And I think the dark force theory argues you're going to want to target any civilization less advanced than you, because you don't want them to become an advanced civilization that could rival you.
Yeah, but then again, if you start targeting those civilizations, you then show yourself to the larger civilizations that could then target you, and you've proven yourself hostile.
That is also a fair point. And an issue with the dark force theory is that, you know, if you're this raging civilization taking pot shots at anyone that reveals themselves, how long before someone decides to take you out too? Because like you said, you're now showing yourself to be incredibly hostile.
Exactly. Which could then bring an actual benefit to not acting through the way of the dark forest theory, right? You said that option A and B give us little benefit. But if we are able to see that there is other alien life, and we can assume that alien life out there could be in more abundance, perhaps even a galactic community of some type, then it would be in our best interest not to fire.
That's true. But I do want to point out, though, that this notion of civilizations directly shooting each other isn't the only way that you can have a dark force state.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A famous one is something like the Inhibitors from Revelation Space. If anyone's read that book, it's a great book. They basically designed a machine intelligence that roams around the galaxy and annihilates any budding civilization that's entering the interstellar theater. And this is another solution or another proposal of the dark force theory is maybe you've had... Are you familiar with von Neumann probes?
Yes.
So von Neumann probes are self-replicating probes, and it's a proposed way to colonize the entire galaxy. You send them off, they go to another solar system, they replicate themselves, and then they exponentially spread across the galaxy. There's this proposal for the dark force theory that maybe a civilization has developed von Neumann probes, and either intentionally or accidentally, these probes are also annihilating any form of life that crops up. So if you send out messages and any of these von Neumann probes notice them, they come to your solar system and just cleanse it.
See, I actually would see that as a far more likely outcome as to what could happen. Maybe a civilization advanced not just a couple thousand years, but 1,000,000 years prior to us. And they've reached levels that are unfathomable. And they thought, in the same way that we would think it's in our best interest to destroy our neighbors that are similar in technology to us, they were like, let's just destroy everything that gets to a certain point, right? And it could be that they come down and they just eradicate the smartest creature on that planet, and then they fly off until it gets to another point like that. But we could be being monitored right now and have no idea. But that would mean if that was something that occurred and all of the other civilizations around us were already quiet, they either truly believe in the same theory or they actually were able to witness another civilization go dark because of something like this, and they are already staying quiet, which would mean that everybody that is quiet out in the galaxy is either staying hidden or dead.
Yeah,
at this point.
That's true. To stay quiet, you need to have witnessed someone else get annihilated, right? So that means there does need to be a certain rate of new civilizations cropping up, getting, cold, and then all the remaining civilizations being able to witness that. And this is possible. I mean, this could happen. We've only been able to really do radio astronomy, for example, for 100 years now?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's the case that every 200, 300, 400 years this happens, and any civilization that happens to have the technology to detect this, but doesn't quite have the technology to make themselves noticeable, are just the lucky ones. They get to see this happen and they know to shut up. Yeah. Or like you said, it's possible that it's just every civilization gets annihilated eventually. Because one of the issues with the dark force theory is that you really can't stay hidden on the galactic scale. You really can't hide life on a planet. I think a lot of people imagine our radio signals and our broadcast signals are what gives us away. But those actually are pretty unlikely to be discovered by an alien civilization, at least right now. And that's not the biggest giveaway that there's life on Earth. Actually, our atmosphere is going to be the biggest giveaway that there's life on Earth. One of the ways that SETI actually looks for alien life, and something that an advanced civilization would be able to do much better, is we will actually take a spectra of the atmosphere of a planet when it's passing between its star and our telescopes. Mm-hmm. And by the way the light from that star gets shifted as it passes through the atmosphere, we can figure out the chemical composition of the atmosphere of that planet. And we can look for things like high oxygen content, for example, because oxygen is a fairly volatile element. It's very reactive. So it's actually pretty rare to have high concentrations of oxygen on rocky planets, for example, because it typically gets sequestered in the form of like oxides, like iron oxides. Mm-hmm. So if you see a planet with high oxygen content, it's a dead giveaway that planet probably has life.
At least plant life.
Yes, at least plant life or some type of life.
Yeah, some type of life that converts something into oxygen.
Exactly, because it has to be a constant, reoccurring process. And there aren't many, or as far as I know, there might not be any natural processes for this to happen. So that means if there is some alien intelligence looking to eliminate any life in the galaxy, they already know Earth has life. That leads to one possibility, right? If this is true, if the dark force theory is true, and there's an advanced species eliminating any lesser species, it must be the case that at least basic life is very common. Because otherwise, the life on Earth would have been eliminated a long time ago. Mm-hmm. But if you imagine a situation where maybe basic life is very common, then these biomarkers of life would be all over the galaxy, and there's too many of them to efficiently go and kill all of them. But if intelligent life is very rare, then that's the only situation where the dark force theory makes sense, is that basic life must be common, intelligent life must be very rare.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. They would be looking not just for life, but for signs that life is advancing in a way that they could get to the point that higher civilization is right now.
Exactly.
And actually become a threat. We could build a Dyson swarm and then get blown up 20 years later.
Yeah, that. Or we could just get annihilated down the road, because if they're constantly checking the spectra of planets that can harbor life, they might be looking for certain key compounds that indicate that industry has happened in that planet. If you see a sudden spike in carbon dioxide, for example, maybe that would be a sign of, hey, you know, over the past 100 years, this planet has had an unprecedented spike of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. Let's send a dark force strike to them just to be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they saw evidence of us splitting the atom. And they were like, okay, it's time to go.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's very possible there's certain compounds that are made once that happens. And once that's detected, maybe these horde of robot intelligences go, oh, no, that planet needs to go.
They could be on their way right now. They're just 1,000 years out.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, no, it's all part of the fun.
Oh, is it fun? I don't know.
Now, but talking about all that doom and gloom, there is a little bit on the brighter side. Personally, I don't think that the dark forest theory would be a viable solution to this paradox. And I feel like you feel the same, Jake.
Yeah, I do. I think it has a lot of issues. I think the one I proposed of roaming von Neumann probes are the most likely solution, but that also has a couple of problems with it too, in the sense that I wouldn't have expected life on Earth to get as far as it has already if that was the case.
Yeah. The biggest issue that I find with it is that as we progress as a civilization, we become less violent.
Okay.
So you would have to assume that trend would continue. And that trend would then, assuming that all life grows up the same way, which it might not.
Yeah.
But assuming that all life would grow in the same way culturally as ours does, then we would assume that as they progress and as we become a more unified planet, we would have those thoughts of violence less and less. And a higher civilization right now might not even have thoughts of claim and violence.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. And I can see some logic behind that, or some rationale behind it. You would think as a civilization gets larger and tries to undertake larger projects like developing an orbital economy, branching out into space, they would need more collaboration. I think we're going to need significant levels of international collaboration to significantly colonize our solar system. So perhaps you're right. That's a necessary prerequisite to advance to the stars, is to become less violent and less tribal. Mm-hmm. Is it universalizable? To an extent, I think so, maybe, unless you have a violent hive mind out there that...
Yeah, or you could have warrior cultures that pride themselves on killing and sacrifice, and they've advanced in some way.
I think that's actually pretty unlikely.
Yeah, but it is a possibility.
Is it? I don't know. I have a hard time imagining a warrior culture like the Klingons from Star Trek could actually become spacefaring. Even in the lore of Star Trek, the Klingons weren't always warrior-like. They developed significantly before they became like that. And I think even their warrior-like antics are contained to very specific things. The majority of the population is not going around and murdering everyone anytime.
No, that is true. The reason why I say that could be a possibility is imagine a solar system where there's intelligent life that develops side by side. You could have spacefaring wars between the neighboring planets, which could then drive their technology even farther more advanced, because war does advance technology in most cases.
I guess that's true, or at least in humans it does, because it's the only time we actually put a lot of money behind R&D.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily universalizably true. You might have a species that just values research and just dedicates a significant portion of its version of a GDP to research anyways.
Yes. And just to be clear, I do agree with you that it is probably not likely, but it's not impossible.
I guess it's not impossible. I do think it, yeah. And that's the thing with the dark force theory in general. People like to argue, I've made several posts about this on Threads, and the general argument is that it's unlikely that civilizations would advance to then still be a violence. But my argument to that is always, you only need one. You only need one civilization to get spacefaring technology that decides to eliminate anyone else underneath them to have a dark force state.
That is true.
So even if it's incredibly rare that does happen, it only needs to happen once. So it depends how common life is.
Yeah. There could be a section in our galaxy that is currently experiencing a dark forest.
Yeah,
right? But perhaps then there is even another filter that could weed them out.
Yeah.
And then we're in multiple different theories or solutions for the Fermi Paradox.
Absolutely. I will also say, too, an issue with the dark force theory is I went into kind of the game theory behind it at the beginning of the episode. And mathematically, that kind of works on paper, but there are some significant issues. One of them I briefly touched on, which is that there is a significant risk to you performing a dark force strike to trying to eliminate a budding civilization, is that one, you're identifying yourself. It's really hard to launch something like that without being seen by others. And two, you have to be 100% certain that your dark force strike is going to eliminate that civilization, or else you've now just increased the likelihood that they're going to retaliate. you've taken a huge risk. And if you can't guarantee 100% success, is it worth it to take that risk in the first place? And that's the type of math that every civilization would be running.
Yeah.
And because of light delay, you have no idea what that species is like when your relativistic missile reaches there.
Yeah.
So it could be the case that you're looking at this civilization, they're 300 light years away, you're 100% certain that if you fired your RKV right now and it hit their sun, it could eliminate them. But can you be sure that when it actually reaches there in 300 years, they haven't advanced more than that?
Yeah, it definitely is a massive risk at that point when you do think about it.
And can you be sure there's not some more advanced civilization than you also looking for people firing these types of weapons? And the minute you fire yours, they might be firing theirs at you. Like we said, we touched on earlier, you've now identified yourself to the whole galaxy as a risk.
Exactly. They could have just been indoctrinated into a galactic security type of thing where it's just mutually assured safety amongst everybody. And then the new guy comes into the room and starts launching missiles. Yeah. They're going to be like, dude, get rid of him.
Yeah, exactly.
Get him out of here.
I do think the notion of some type of intergalactic community is actually pretty unlikely just due to light delay. Having any type of coherent large body that spans a galaxy is just... it's not doable, in my opinion. This goes also with colonization, but even with alien species, I think it's unlikely you're going to have any type of wide-scale communication or coordination, because how could you?
Yeah, we could think of it this way as that super advanced civilization that came a million years prior, they don't communicate with any of the planets, but they do ensure the mutual safety of them.
One way you could somewhat go about this is it won't be coordinated in the way you're thinking of an intergalactic security force, but it could be the case that when we launch into space and we start expanding, we get a message from a more advanced species, or maybe several of them, that says, hey, congratulations, welcome to the galaxy. You are allowed to expand 200 light years, maybe 1,000 light years from the radius of your home planet. That is your volume of space, and everyone is going to immediately target you and destroy you if you expand any further than that. That's the space you get. Please put up some markers, maybe a giant broadcasting station that says, this is my area. And if you expand beyond that, then you've become a target for everyone.
Yeah. See, a galactic community that never sees each other, but gets a singular message.
Yes.
To let us know that they are there. I feel like that would be probably the most realistic thing that we could look to coexisting with alien life.
Yeah, I agree. And the irony of that is actually how dark force here on Earth actually work. Predators, they mark their territory. And the reason you do that is you're telling any would-be attacker of your same species or anything like, hey, this is my territory. And that's going to dissuade a majority of them who decide they don't want to deal with the fighting. Because it's a huge risk in nature to actually have a battle. Because if you get injured, it's death. And it's kind of the same thing in space, right? If you try to take over a region of space, you're also risking yourself getting injured. And maybe in a dark forest state galaxy, taking a significant blow, it might not kill you, but now you've become significantly weakened and there's a risk other people are going to attack you.
Yeah.
So by just announcing your presence, saying, I'm taking this volume of space, it's mine, that could be enough for someone to say, it's not worth it to expand into that space. Even if it would be beneficial to me, it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah. Which would definitely be much more of a safe route. It's just establishing that communication, marking our territory to others would be something that would have to be understood throughout. So it would need that generalized message.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe some type of beacon that just announces it. And we don't see anything like this, though, is the only problem. Is you would expect these beacons to work on some form of electromagnetic radiation. I guess people always say, maybe they use some form of communication that we don't know of. It's not impossible. If you're a tribe in the Amazon, you might look around and say there's no other civilization because you can't detect radio waves. I don't know if I fully buy that, though. I don't know. There could be maybe some form of extra layer of physics that enables communication that we're unaware of, that maybe is beneficial on galactic scales that we haven't discovered. And maybe when we develop that technology, we'll find that we actually are surrounded by aliens. But I do actually personally believe that's probably not likely.
Yeah. I mean, I like to buy into the thoughts that we're just scratching the surface of anything that science can offer us, because that's how science always is. We think that we understand it, and it's never the same 100 years later. I have no evidence to support that wouldn't continue, right? So, you know, I will buy into that. But then, of course, on the other hand, we have to try to understand and rationalize these theories with what I do know currently. Yeah. So I do see both sides of that.
It could be the case that maybe the whole galaxy is communicating with gravitational waves, which is something that is real and can be manipulated. And maybe it turns out that's more efficient over long distances. And some technology allows that to be a way we communicate. Because right now, humans can detect gravitational waves, but we can only detect massive events like two black holes colliding. So maybe all these civilizations have discovered an efficient way to send messages that way, and that's how they have to communicate, and we just can't detect those signals with the right level of fidelity.
It definitely could be.
And that's just one example. Maybe there's some other stuff too. We don't really understand dark matter, dark energy. Maybe there's something that can be done with that, or maybe there's a level beyond that.
Yeah, it is just like these are all theories for things that could work that way. But another reason why I don't feel like the dark forest theory would be a real thing is because watching our civilization and how we have eagerly thrown our information in space. On our Voyagers, we've put our understanding of physics and the coordinates to our planet specifically in the universe. We have SETI, whose entire job is to try and find alien life, and which then would reveal us.
Yeah.
At what point do we just completely shift and go, oh, stop all that. We're just going to hide.
Yeah, I know. I agree with that. And there's this axiom in statistics that says if you only ever have one datum point and you need to extrapolate off from that data point a much larger set, you should always assume that data point comes from an average because it's much more likely to represent an average result than an outlier. I think with what you said, we should look at what humanity's doing, and it's not an unreasonable assumption to think aliens would do the same thing. And I think naturally, if you're going to be a spacefaring civilization, you have to be at least somewhat curious to develop science in the first place. So I think, yeah, why wouldn't alien civilizations also announce their presence and try to find other ones out there?
Yeah. Even with us, I feel that humans and our planet are particularly violent.
I think what I said also applies here. We should assume humans are about an average level of aggression. Any alien civilization has also had to go through natural selection, evolution, predation. So I think it's reasonable to assume we're not uniquely violent. We're probably averagely violent.
Okay. Yeah. No, that I do agree with that. We are averagely violent, right? But we are violent. But yet we still go into this new frontier and what could be new civilizations with an eagerness.
Yeah.
Instead of a fear.
I think so, yeah.
And I just feel like that will never naturally shift unless, like we talked about before, we saw evidence of life on a planet and then one day it just went out.
Yeah, that, or maybe as we develop technology, we start finding signs of ruined civilization. At that point, we might say, all right, guys, we got to be quiet. Something's going on here. A lot of civilizations are falling. Shut it all down. Shut it all off.
Yeah, but then you also have to assume if we are an average and other civilizations developed like us, who started it?
Yeah.
Who was like, oh, there they are. Let's launch the first missile and get this whole thing going. It just seems unlikely to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. The Dark Forest Theory, it's good food for thought. Makes a great book, The Three-Body Problem. If you haven't read it, that series, the second, which is literally called The Dark Forest. And while it didn't invent this theory, it did make it popular. It was a great book. I liked it. But I think reality, that's not, I believe, the most realistic solution to the Fermi Paradox.
No, it is one of the most exciting, though.
It
makes
is.
for good books.
It does. It's a great, yeah. Tells a wonderful story, I think.
Yeah.
All right, Lucas, I think we both have similar feelings on the Dark Forest. This was an interesting discussion. Hey, before you guys close out of your players of choice, I want to let you guys know that as we are approaching our 10th episode, Lucas and I want to make an additional episode of sort of like an AMA, get to know us and all that we will release after episode 10, but before episode 11. So if you have any questions for us, whether it's personal questions about Lucas or me, if it's questions regarding anything on science fiction, futurism, questions about previous episodes, questions about the podcast itself, just let us know. Leave it in the comments of whatever platform you're on. I check all of those. If the podcast platform you're on doesn't allow comments, check out our threads. I'm going to put a post on there so that you guys can leave your questions and those will be answered in that episode. And like I said, that's not going to replace episode 10 or 11. It'll be released the Monday in between. Please leave your questions. We're eager to get to know you guys a little bit better. And I think it'd be a great way for you guys to get to know us personally.
Yeah. It'll be fun.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us. Please stick around to the end to hear our author spotlight.
Thank you all so much.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Mark Salzwedel. In 2022, I wrote my first novel, a sci-fi thriller called The Lever. It is unique because almost the entire cast of characters is lesbian or gay, and the themes center around what makes a leader and what makes us human. The antagonist also happens to be a bigger bogeyman now than when I wrote it, a sentient AI. Here's a short excerpt from Chapter 30. Shonda hid in the corner furthest from the front door of Grosskopf Grocery. After 10 minutes with no young people in gray coveralls with weapons entering, Shonda tried to blend in more, as if she were shopping. She wandered down the aisles trying to look indecisive for almost an hour. She found the extreme heights of cakes and breads possible at such a low gravity engaging for a few minutes. Several unmarked bins full of strange produce that could have been grains or nuts kept her attention for a few more.